I spent my whole life playing second fiddle to my daughter, only for her to replace me with a new father in front of everyone. People sneered and lectured me about my failures while my ex-wife told me to just deal with it. When I ended up broke and dying in a hospital bed, they all said I had it coming. Now that I have been given a second chance at life, I refuse to let them walk all over me again. It all started when my daughter insisted on joining a dad swap program to experience a different style of parenting. She went to stay at a classmate's house for the day, and her classmate came to live with me. I spent the day helping her classmate with his schoolwork, limiting his screen time, and carefully mapping out a productive schedule for him. When the day was over, the boy looked me in the eye and told me I was way too old school. He said I was stuck in the past, and that Ava was miserable having a father like me. I was stunned when my daughter finally came home and immediately told me I wasn't as attractive as Marcus Miller. She claimed he actually understood her and pampered her in a way I never could. She told me her mother was right about me being a terrible father. So I spent the next few years trying to change myself to fit her twisted ideals. No matter how hard I tried to please her, she always found something new to complain about. Eventually, the stress of balancing a demanding job and a thankless family destroyed my health, leaving me with a terminal diagnosis. When I finally swallowed my pride and asked her for help with the medical bills, she just gave me a freezing look and said I had lived long enough anyway. She told me that wasting money on my treatment was pointless because she had already given her savings to Marcus Miller so he could hire a housekeeper. She told me to handle my own problems and walked away. I died in total despair, but when I opened my eyes again, I realized I had been sent back to the beginning. This time, I was going to let my daughter's classmate lecture me all he wanted about being a good parent. The boy, Ethan Miller, started off by saying that even though I had only been his temporary dad for a day, he was already exhausted. He couldn't believe how boring I was compared to his own father, who gave him total freedom to do whatever he wanted without any rules. He complained that I was too controlling and constantly setting limits on everything. Ethan was only 13, but he rolled his eyes with the attitude of a grown man as he spoke. He said Ava was cursed to have me as a father, then handed me a small notebook he had put together. Just like in my previous life, the boy handed me a red, handwritten journal titled The Guide to Raising a Dad. Last time, this moment sent me into a spiral of self-loathing and doubt. Everyone already knew that Ava and I had a strained relationship, so I assumed I was the one failing her. I spent years wondering if my parenting style was truly broken. However, looking back, my downfall began the moment I took that notebook seriously. Shortly after I married Hannah, she decided to quit her job and stay home permanently. She told me that marriage was about finding security and a provider, and she was done with the grind of 9 to 5. Luckily, I had a high-paying corporate job at the time, so being the sole breadwinner didn't feel like an impossible burden. It wasn't until I started following that guide to change my parenting that things fell apart. I was working around the clock to fund her lifestyle, only to come home and serve her hand and foot. I had to walk on eggshells to provide constant emotional validation, acting like a machine that never ran out of fuel. Despite all my sacrifices, she ended up running away with some delinquent with neon hair. She got pregnant, and when the guy dumped her, she insisted on moving to Europe alone while still carrying the baby. She had some delusional idea about being the hero of her own story and making her ex crawl back to her in regret. That deadbeat moved on with his life while I was left picking up the pieces as the ATM father. I pushed myself to the brink of exhaustion just to send her thousands of dollars every month for her expenses. She eventually moved back to the States, but she acted like I didn't even exist. I told myself she was just bad at communicating and that she surely appreciated everything I had done. That illusion shattered when I was in the hospital and asked her for a small loan to cover my copay. She just laughed and asked how someone could live for 75 years and be so pathetic that they couldn't find $1,000. She told me to look at Marcus Miller, who was still fit and living his best life while I was falling apart. She said having me as a father was the biggest curse of her life. I sat on the hospital steps for an entire day, replaying every moment of my life and realizing where I went wrong. I finally accepted that she had never respected me and had always looked down on me with contempt. I couldn't figure out when it started. Maybe it was when I skipped meals to buy her expensive toys, or when I gave up my own dreams to satisfy her and Hannah. I had traded my soul for their happiness, and they hated me for it. The answer doesn't matter anymore because I have been given a clean slate. This time, I'm going to prioritize myself. I tossed the red notebook into the trash and grabbed Ethan's suitcase. He looked at me in confusion and asked what I was doing. I gave him a small smile and told him that an incompetent father like me had nothing to offer him. I told him it was better to go back to his perfect home instead of wasting his time with me. Ethan was speechless as I walked him back to his house just a few blocks away. When we arrived, I saw Marcus Miller leading my daughter around on a horse. He had bought her an ice cream, and she looked thrilled sitting up there on the saddle. Ethan lost his mind the second he saw them, charging toward them without even taking off his shoes. He snatched the cone out of Ava's hand and screamed at her to stay away from his father. Ava looked completely crushed and turned to Marcus for comfort without even acknowledging my presence. Marcus sighed and asked his son why he was back so early when the swap wasn't over yet. Ava regained her confidence and told Ethan that Marcus was her father for the day, pointing dismissively toward me. She looked at me with nothing but annoyance and contempt. Ethan threw a tantrum and screamed that I wasn't his father and that we belonged together because we were both losers. Ava was so humiliated that she couldn't even form a sentence, her face turning a deep shade of scarlet as she fought back tears. She suddenly screamed that she didn't want a father like me and wished Marcus was her real dad. Marcus looked at me with a fake apologetic expression and suggested that Ava stay with him for the night to calm down. He told me not to take her words to heart, even though he clearly enjoyed the validation. I had lived through this exact moment before. In my past life, my pride got the better of me, and I dragged her home to prove I could be just as good as Marcus. I spent that entire life trying to buy her love with kindness and patience, but it never worked. In my first life, she spent the whole car ride home ignoring me and acting like a martyr. Later, I found out she told Hannah that I was a manipulative wolf in sheep's clothing. She claimed my kindness was just a cover for my true, evil nature, and I was too exhausted to even defend myself. I realized then that my constant striving for her approval was exactly what made her lose respect for me. This time, I wasn't going to beg for the title of fatherhood. I smiled at Marcus and told him he was more than welcome to keep her as long as he wanted. All three of them looked at me like I had grown a second head. Ethan was furious, while Ava looked genuinely shocked that I was actually leaving. Marcus seemed the most unsettled, his fake polite mask slipping for a split second before he asked if this was really appropriate. I turned the question to Ava and asked her if she thought it was okay. Her eyes lit up as she asked Marcus if she could live with him forever. Marcus hesitated for a moment before saying yes, though he kept glancing at me as if he expected me to start a fight. I just got a short laugh and walked away without looking back. If they wanted to be a family so badly, they could deal with each other's drama. With Ava gone for the weekend, I finally had time to actually breathe. I called up some old friends for drinks and barbecue, enjoying myself for the first time in years. We spent the night at a gaming lounge without me having to worry about Ava's school projects. I didn't have to wake up at dawn to drive her to campus while exhausted. I slept until 3 the next afternoon, ordered some wings, and cracked open a cold beer while watching the game on TV. While I was relaxing, I saw that a new game I had been waiting for finally launched. So I treated myself to the collector's edition. Back then, I still had some ambition left in me. I spent my free time doing freelance, writing to bring in some extra cash on the side. In my past life, every cent of that extra income went toward Hannah and Ava's shopping habits. Hannah eventually complained that my side hustle was taking away from our quality time, so I quit. From that point on, my entire existence was dedicated to being their emotional support and financial provider. Taking my life back felt better than I could have ever imagined. I was at the gaming lounge with my friends when Hannah tried to FaceTime me. When I picked up, I saw that half of Ava's face was covered in nasty bruises. Hannah started screaming through the phone, demanding to know where I was and why I hadn't been answering her calls. She pointed the camera at Ava's face and blamed me for her getting hurt. I just leaned back and asked Ava how she managed to get beat up at Marcus Miller's perfect house. Ava was crying and told me that Ethan was the one who hit her. I told her she must have done something to provoke him. She screamed that all she did was call Marcus Miller her dad, and she couldn't understand why Ethan would snap over that. I asked if Marcus had done anything to stop his son from hitting her. Ava just looked away and stayed silent, which told me everything I needed to know. I pointed out that Marcus was probably just standing there watching, showing his true colors as a biased parent. Hannah immediately snapped at me for insulting Marcus's character. She claimed he was a perfect gentleman and would never do such a thing. It was the same old story. Hannah always defended that man the second I pointed out his obvious flaws. My daughter had been brainwashed into thinking Marcus was some kind of saint. They both conveniently forgot that I was the one working 50 hours a week to pay for the roof over their heads. Marcus's version of parenting was all talk and no substance. She didn't actually know the man, but she was convinced he was better than me. I stayed out of it and let her stay at the Miller house for 3 full days. I have no idea what went on over there, but when she finally came home, she was unusually quiet and didn't join in on Hannah's nagging. Hannah suggested that Ava spend some time away from me to clear her head. She said she would take her for a few days until our relationship improved, assuming I would be out anyway. I didn't even let her finish her speech before I told her to go ahead and have a great time. They both stared at the screen in disbelief. Hannah asked if I was joking, but I told her I was too busy with my own life to care. I hung up the call and went right back to my match. I remembered sitting on those hospital steps in my past life, realizing that I had lost the game before it even began. When Hannah insisted on giving Ava a middle name that honored her ex-boyfriend, I should have seen the writing on the wall. I spent my whole life chasing a woman who was already halfway out the door. I was tired of chasing after people who didn't want to be caught. Since I couldn't keep them, I decided to just let them go. When I finally walked into the house, Hannah pointed to an expensive designer cake on the counter and said Marcus Miller had bought it for me. She lectured me about how hard Marcus worked as a single father and how I should be more like him. She told me I needed to be more helpful toward him since he was so thoughtful. I stared at the cake and started laughing because Marcus Miller had always been a master of public relations. He always played the part of the friendly neighbor, calling me by name and dropping off little gifts. Anyone with a brain could see through it. A guy doesn't just buy $100 cake for his male neighbor for no reason. It was obvious that the cake was just leftovers from one of his secret dates with my wife. I told Hannah that Marcus clearly adored Ava and that since she wanted him as a father, she should just move in with him. I suggested they could officially make him her godfather so they could spend all the time they wanted together. Hannah was so shocked, she practically jumped out of her seat. She accused me of having an affair, saying it was the only explanation for why I suddenly didn't care about Ava staying out late. I just reminded her that Marcus wasn't a stranger and was clearly her most trusted friend. She went silent, unable to find a comeback for that. She eventually asked me if I had been seeing an ex-girlfriend during my time away. She pouted and snatched my phone, scrolling through my bank statements to see where I had been spending money. In the past, I would have found her jealousy flattering, but now it just felt pathetic. After she saw that I had only been spending money at gaming lounges and fast food places, she rolled her eyes and told me to grow up. She told me to stop acting like a teenager and then started frantically cleaning the living room. It was clear she was using the chores to distract herself from her own guilt. They say guilty people try to stay busy to avoid their own thoughts, and Hannah was the perfect example of that. She mentioned that Ava might need a woman's help while staying at Marcus's place, since he was a single guy. I didn't even let her finish the thought before I told her she should go over there too. She looked at me with wide eyes and started stammering about how they were just friends. She insisted that nothing inappropriate would ever happen between them, even if the kids weren't around. Her desperate need to explain herself was hilarious, especially since she had never looked this guilty in our first life. Back then, I spent all my energy trying to catch her in the act, but she always managed to flip the script on me. She would call me a controlling narcissist and claim her privacy was sacred as an independent woman. Now that I truly didn't care what she did, she was the one falling apart. I can never forget the day I found out they had been taking secret vacations together for years. She had the nerve to tell me they were just looking at the scenery and that their relationship was purely platonic. She blamed me for all her regrets, saying I was the only thing standing in the way of her happiness. Hannah thought that as long as they didn't sleep together, she was still a loyal wife. Ava would always take her side, reminding me that Marcus was her mother's first love and that I had stolen her life. She acted like I was the villain for being the man her mother actually married. I was completely done with their drama and moved back to my family's place in the suburbs. While I was gone, Ava was busy posting all over Facebook about how she finally had a real father. She also complained about Ethan Miller, saying that Marcus belonged to her more than his own son. Her last post said that her biological father must be dead since she hadn't heard from me. Eventually, Marcus Miller called me, sounding absolutely exhausted, and begged me to come get my daughter. It seemed like his perfect gentleman persona was finally starting to crack under the pressure of actually raising her. I ignored his calls and didn't bother responding to his messages for weeks. I finally showed up at the house the day before New Year's Eve without telling anyone I was coming. When I walked in, I found Hannah and Marcus cooking together while Ava was happily calling him dad. Marcus started to praise her, but froze when he saw me standing in the doorway. He jumped up and tried to claim that Ava was just calling him her godfather and that I shouldn't take it the wrong way. Hannah turned bright red and asked me what I was doing back so soon. I ignored them and asked where Ethan was. Ava piped up and said that Ethan had thrown a tantrum because he was jealous of her and had run away. She said she knew Marcus was too fair to take his son's side, while Marcus just stood there looking like he wanted to vanish. Marcus had been blowing up my phone for weeks, desperate for me to take Ava off his hands. In that little guide Ethan had written, Marcus was described as this calm, patient saint who never lost his temper. I knew it was only a matter of time before that facade came crashing down. Marcus wasn't a saint. He was just a better actor than most. However, even the best performers have their breaking point. I casually mentioned that I'd seen a boy who looked like Ethan on my way over. Marcus immediately stood up, looking worried. I told him I saw the boy hanging out with some rough-looking teenagers down the street. Marcus was about to go after him, but Hannah grabbed his arm and told him to let the boy go. She said Ethan was old enough to handle himself, and that chasing him would only validate his bad behavior. She reminded him that he had promised to spend the evening with Ava. Marcus was clearly torn, but Ava latched onto his arm and insisted that he stay. She told him that Ethan was just being dramatic and that Marcus shouldn't let him ruin their night. I had a laugh at the absurdity of the situation. I told Ava that it was perfectly normal for a father to prioritize his own son. Ava screamed at me, insisting that Marcus was different and that he loved her more than anyone else. Marcus eventually sat back down, clearly feeling guilty but unable to say no to them. I took a quick photo of the three of them looking like a happy family and posted it on Facebook for everyone to see. 15 minutes later, Ethan Miller kicked the front door open and stormed into the room. He flipped the entire table of food over before grabbing a heavy wooden rolling pin. He swung it with everything he had, hitting Ava right in the side of the head. She screamed in agony as Hannah immediately lunged forward and slapped Ethan across the face. Hannah grabbed the boy by his shirt and was about to hit him again when Marcus finally stepped in. He roared at her to stop, but Hannah was fuming. She screamed that Ethan was out of control and that someone had to teach him a lesson since Marcus wouldn't. Marcus shoved her away, his face pale with rage. He told her she had no right to lay a hand on his son and turned his anger toward Ava. He screamed that Ava was a brat who did nothing but harass Ethan and follow him around like a lost puppy. He turned his glare toward me and asked if I was ashamed of being such a failure of a father. I just shrugged and reminded him that Ava had chosen him over me. I asked him if he expected me to keep being her doormat while she worshipped the ground he walked on. I told him I was done playing the role of the devoted servant for a daughter who hated me. I said I would rather sign divorce papers than spend another minute begging for their affection. Marcus's eyes practically sparkled at the mention of divorce, and I saw a similar look of hope on Hannah's face. They knew I had once sworn never to leave Hannah, which was why they felt so comfortable disrespecting me. In my past life, I held on to that promise until my dying breath, no matter how much they humiliated me. This time, I was giving them exactly what they wanted. I watched as Marcus tried to hide his excitement while his son was still sobbing on the floor. He finally remembered to help Ethan up and try to play the part of the polite neighbor again. He told me he wasn't trying to break up my marriage, even though his eyes told a different story. He told us to handle our own marital issues and made a quick exit, but not before sharing a long, knowing look with Hannah. The funniest part was Ava's reaction. Even though Marcus had just insulted her and blamed her for everything, she still chased him to the door and begged him to stay. She cried about the dumplings they were supposed to make together. Marcus forced a smile and told her he would come back once we settled our business. Ava nodded like a loyal dog, completely oblivious to the look of pure disgust Marcus gave her when she wasn't looking. If she really got her wish of having him as a stepfather, she was in for a rude awakening. Once the Millers were gone, Hannah started sighing dramatically and asked me where I had been. She gave me a resentful look, as if my absence was the cause of all her problems. I pointed out that I had been gone for 2 weeks, and she was only just noticing. I asked her what she had been so busy with that she couldn't even send a text message to check on me. Her face went pale as she realized I was calling her out on her own negligence. Ava piped up and told me to stop being such a typical controlling male. She said it was no wonder no one liked me, and that Marcus would never treat a woman like that. I just laughed and told her she had learned Marcus's manipulation tactics very quickly. I told her that one day she would realize I was the only person who actually cared about her. She rolled her eyes and told me I was delusional. She screamed that she only called me dad because of biology and that she wished we weren't even related. She called me a worthless piece of trash and told me to move out so she wouldn't have to look at me. I turned to Hannah and asked if she agreed with her daughter. She looked down at the floor and told me she never wanted to hurt me, but she had to think about what was best for Ava. She started her speech about how she wanted our marriage to work, but had to prioritize her daughter's mental health. I just nodded and told her that if she felt that way, we should just get a divorce. She froze in her tracks, as if she couldn't believe I had finally said the words. Even Ava was momentarily silenced by the shock of it all. Hannah tried to say I was just joking, but I assured her I was dead serious. Ava suddenly got excited and told her mom to get the paperwork ready before I changed my mind. Hannah told her to be quiet, still trying to play the part of the reluctant wife. She always wanted to have her cake and eat it too, but she couldn't resist the opportunity. An hour later, she had a draft of the divorce agreement ready for me to sign. She claimed we were only doing this for Ava and that we could get back together once things settled down. I took one look at the paperwork and tossed it onto the coffee table. I told her the financial division she proposed was completely unacceptable. Hannah asked what the problem was, and I laid it all out for her. I pointed out that she had been funneling my income to her deadbeat brother and had bought her parents a house without my knowledge. I told her that all of that money was coming out of her half of our assets. I also mentioned the 5-figure loan she had given Marcus Miller for his new car. Her face turned ghost white, and she couldn't even find a way to deny it. Realizing she was caught, she finally agreed to a settlement that left me with the majority of our savings. I walked away with most of our wealth, leaving her with just enough to get by. We filed the papers right after the holidays and started the mandatory cooling-off period. As I was packing my last few boxes, Marcus Miller showed up at the front door to see me off. He gave me a fake somber look and said he was so sorry things had ended this way. I just smiled and told him that if they got married, he better take good care of my daughter. I told him I didn't want her to have a hard life under his roof. Marcus promised me that he treated all children equally and would never show favoritism. Hannah scoffed and told me to stop being so dramatic, claiming she and Marcus were just friends. I didn't even bother to respond to her lies as I walked out the door for good. She claimed the car loan was just a friendly gesture and that I was overreacting. Her holier-than-thou attitude was exhausting, so I just turned around and left without a word. From that moment on, I was officially free from their toxic games. Surprisingly, Hannah started texting me almost immediately after I moved out. The second day, she sent me an iMessage complaining about how rude Ethan was. She said he and Ava were already fighting over who got the bigger bedroom in the new house. By day 3, she was whining about how exhausting it was to raise 2 kids, especially one that wasn't hers. A few days later, She started complaining about Marcus himself. She mentioned that he was spending all his time helping Ethan with homework while telling Ava to just figure out on her own. She was shocked that Marcus wasn't being the attentive father figure he had promised to be. I didn't respond to any of her messages and spent my days hanging out with friends and playing basketball. I was finally enjoying my life without having to answer to anyone. I was living my best life and didn't have time for their nonsense. Hannah eventually got desperate and called me during the holidays. She started crying about how she usually took Ava to see her parents and how much the girl missed them. She told me that Marcus had tried to send Ava away to my family's place so he could take Hannah and Ethan to see his own parents. She said Ava was devastated by the rejection. Before she could finish, Ava grabbed the phone and started screaming. Ava demanded to know why Marcus was treating her like an outsider after being so kind to her during the swap. I just reminded her that she was the one who chose him as her new father. I told her she should just try to be more charming and win him over like she used to. She started sobbing and asked if I would reconsider the divorce. She claimed that Marcus was only nice to her when I was still in the picture. I just laughed at myself because she still didn't realize that Marcus only used her to get closer to Hannah. I told her it wasn't going to happen and hung up. I ignored the rest of their calls and spent the afternoon forwarding all of Hannah's complaints to Marcus Miller. I wanted him to see exactly what his new girlfriend was saying about him behind his back. Marcus lost his mind and sent me a furious text message. He accused me of trying to win Hannah back during the cooling off period. He told me that Hannah was obsessed with him and that he could get her back with just a few sweet words. Marcus clearly didn't understand the woman he was dealing with. Hannah was a narcissist who only cared about her own comfort and image. There was no way she was going to spend her holidays at a stranger's house while feeling like a bad mother. I saw on Facebook that Marcus and Ethan eventually caved and went to Hannah's parents' house for the holidays. My former brother-in-law called me the next morning, laughing his head off. He said the family dinner had turned into a complete disaster. Hannah's father decided to test Marcus by treating Ava like a princess while constantly belittling Ethan. Marcus was so desperate to impress his future father-in-law that he went along with it. He started ignoring his own son just to prove he could be a good stepfather to Ava. He pampered Ava in front of everyone while Ethan sat there fuming. My brother-in-law overheard Marcus telling his son to just hold on for one more month until the divorce was final. However, Ethan couldn't take it anymore and showed up at my doorstep a few days later. He was filming a TikTok when he found me, screaming for the camera that he had finally found his real father. I asked him if he was sure he had the right guy. He just shrugged and said that since the swap never officially ended, I was his father now. It was obvious he was just trying to get back at Marcus by using me. I told him I wasn't interested in being his father, but he wouldn't let me pass. He told me I was a lonely loser and that he was the only person willing to spend time with me. I told him I had money, freedom, and a great career, which was more than enough for me. He looked shocked and reminded me that I had lost my wife and daughter. He claimed they were the most important people in my life and that I should be miserable without them. I had to correct him on that. I told him that just because someone has the title of wife or daughter doesn't automatically make them important. I explained that I only cared about people who actually valued me, regardless of our biological connection. I told him that a title doesn't guarantee a place in my heart. Most kids grow up and forget their parents the second they get what they want. Most married couples end up living completely separate lives. I asked him if he really thought those bonds were as sacred as people claimed. Ethan started crying and demanded that I take Ava back so she would stop stealing his father's attention. I just laughed and said there was nothing I could do. I told him his father was a popular guy and my daughter was obsessed with him. He grabbed my arm and begged me to let him stay, saying that if Ava took his dad, he would take hers. He demanded that I treat him exactly like I used to treat my daughter. When I asked him what that meant, he told me I had to follow the rules in his notebook. I almost laughed at his audacity, but decided to let him stay for a few days. I made it clear that I wasn't his father and that I wouldn't be following his stupid guide. I told him if he wanted to live under my roof, he would have to follow my rules without question. He thought about it for a minute before finally nodding. I took him in and set up a guest room for him, immediately putting him on a strict study schedule. I made sure he had healthy meals and helped him with his homework every night. I took him to theme parks, went skiing, and bought him the latest gear, treating him exactly like I had treated Ava. The only difference was that Ava used to complain that I was embarrassing and out of touch. She always refused to be seen with me in public, claiming our generation gap was too wide. Ethan didn't have a choice and had to follow my lead on everything. My daughter had always seen me as some fossil who couldn't understand the modern world. She thought I was incapable of connecting with anyone from her generation. She used to turn down every invitation I gave her. I once spent a fortune on front row concert tickets for her favorite singer, only for her to tell me to go alone. She said being seen with me would ruin her social standing at school. It had hurt my feelings back then, but taking Ethan out was a completely different experience. He started off acting moody and constantly checking his phone for messages from his dad. I could tell he was waiting for Marcus to come begging for him to return. By the third day, he was actually having fun and laughing. He wasn't particularly talented or smart, but he had an incredible amount of self-confidence. Even though his grades were failing, he convinced himself he was just a late bloomer who would eventually shock the world. He almost wiped out while we were skiing, and I had to swoop in and catch him. He just laughed it off and called himself a lucky man. He looked at me with genuine awe and told me he had no idea I was such an amazing skier. I could see a hint of genuine admiration in his eyes for the first time. I spent my time teaching him sports, tutoring him in math, and even signing him up for language classes. I kept him so busy that he didn't have time to miss his old life. When his teacher praised his progress, he was so excited he practically hit the ceiling. He bragged to me about how he always knew he was a genius. He spent the rest of the day posting on Instagram about how he was destined for greatness. It finally clicked that my parenting style wasn't the problem. Ava just simply didn't like me as a person. Because she hated me, everything I did was seen through a negative lens. Once I accepted that truth, I realized it was time to end my little experiment with Ethan. I was packing his bags when he burst into the room, excitedly talking about a comic convention he wanted to attend. He wanted to go see some cosplayers from a show we both liked. His smile vanished the moment he saw his suitcase sitting on the bed. He asked me what I was doing in a shaky voice. I calmly told him that he wasn't my son and that I had no obligation to keep looking after him. Before he could argue, I heard Marcus Miller screaming outside for me to return his child. Ethan's face went pale as he opened the door to find his father standing there. Marcus looked like a complete wreck. His hair was greasy and unwashed, and his eyes were bloodshot. His clothes were messy, and he looked nothing like the polished, perfect father figure I used to know. Ethan looked terrified of the man standing in front of him and tried to back away. Marcus grabbed him by the arm and ordered him to come home immediately. Ethan just shoved him away and told him to go back to his favorite child, Ava. He told his father he was happier living with me and that his teachers were finally praising his work. He said it turned out he wasn't the idiot Marcus always claimed he was. Marcus looked like he was about to lose his mind right there in my hallway. He had the same desperate, angry look I used to have when Ava would push me too far. He told Ethan that he had no choice because they were family. He promised that things would get better and that Hannah would be his new mother soon. Ethan screamed that he hated Hannah and would never accept her as his mother. This was the one thing that hadn't changed from my past life. Hannah adored Marcus, but she couldn't stand his son and constantly criticized everything the boy did. They fought like cats and dogs every time they were in the same room. Ethan and Marcus had legendary arguments over her in my past life. After the wedding, Ethan moved out and never looked back, while Ava spent all her time sucking up to Marcus. Marcus growled that I was brainwashing the boy and told him to stop listening to my lies. He threatened to use force if Ethan didn't come home right that second. Ethan just looked at him with pure hatred and shoved his hand away again. I told him the conversation was over and that they needed to leave my property. I mentioned that I had already sold the house and the new owners were moving in the next morning. Ethan panicked and begged me to take him with me wherever I was going. Marcus suddenly snapped and punched his son right in the face, knocking him backward. He screamed that Ethan was an ungrateful brat who didn't respect his own father. Ethan was dazed for a moment before pushing Marcus aside and sprinting out the front door. Watching them fall apart felt like a mirror image of the misery I had endured in my first life. I closed my eyes for a second, and when I opened them, The sun was shining through the windows of my new apartment. I was finally done with all of them. Ava's birthday fell on the final day of our divorce cooling-off period. Hannah blew up my phone with dozens of texts, demanding that I come over for the party. She threatened to block the divorce if I didn't show up to celebrate with them. When I walked in, Ava was opening a gift from Marcus Miller. It was a designer diamond necklace that must have cost at least $5,000. Ava was ecstatic, and Hannah looked at Marcus with the most adoring expression I had ever seen. Hannah told Marcus she was sorry for doubting him, and that he was the only one who truly loved Ava. Her father was nodding along, clearly impressed by the expensive gift. It was amazing how quickly a little money could buy people's loyalty. Then, the entire room turned to look at me. They asked me where my gift was, and Ava muttered something about me being too cheap to buy her anything nice. Despite her attitude, I noticed her eyes kept darting to the hallway, as if she expected me to be hiding a surprise. I recalled the nasty text she sent me while I was looking after Ethan. She had called me a deadbeat for ignoring my own child while playing house with another man's son. I hadn't replied then, so I decided to give her the response she deserved now. I told her that since she hated everything I did, I decided not to waste my money on a gift she would just complain about. The room went dead silent as Ava's face twisted with anger. Marcus looked shocked that I wasn't even trying to win back her affection anymore. Hannah dragged me into the kitchen and demanded to know what was wrong with me. She couldn't believe I showed up to our daughter's birthday empty-handed and asked if I was actually serious about ending our marriage. I just looked at her and started laughing in her face. I asked her if she really thought I was just bluffing about the divorce. She bit her lip and accused me of seeing someone else, but I told her to stop playing the victim. I told her I knew exactly what she was trying to do and that I was done being her backup plan. I told her to quit the games and just sign the final papers so we could be done. She suddenly changed her tune and said she realized I was the only man who ever truly cared for her. She claimed that after thinking it over, she realized we were meant to be together. She admitted that Marcus had his flaws and she didn't want the hassle of a new relationship. Then she had the nerve to suggest that I should just accept Marcus as a part of our lives. She said I should be happy to have another man helping me raise Ava so I could have more free time. I was so stunned by her audacity that I felt a headache coming on. I asked her if she had completely lost her mind. I couldn't believe she was actually suggesting that I work myself to death to fund her lifestyle with her lover. She tried to backtrack, but I told her I didn't care what she meant. I was done listening to her lies and turned to walk out of the room. She grabbed my arm and promised she would never speak to Marcus Miller again if I stayed. I shoved her hand off me and told her to get lost. Just then, Ava burst into the kitchen and screamed at her mother for trying to stop me. She pointed a finger at me and yelled that she wanted Marcus to be her father instead of a loser like me. She tried to drag Hannah away, but Hannah stopped and gave me a soulful look. She claimed she knew I was just pretending to be cold because I was still in love with her. I didn't say a word, I just looked her in the eye and flipped her off. Marcus was standing nearby, looking like he wanted to kill someone. He quickly pushed a brand new mountain bike toward Ava, tried to regain control of the situation. He told her he had bought it just for her and promised to get her an even better one if she didn't like this one. Ava was reaching for the bike when Ethan Miller suddenly appeared out of nowhere. He had been hiding in the hallway, listening to everything. He lunged forward and snatched the bike away, inspecting the frame with a dark look on his face. Ava screamed at him to give her bike back, but Ethan was much bigger and stronger than her. He shoved her aside with his shoulder and told the crazy brat to stay back. The situation was quickly spiraling into a physical confrontation. Marcus tried to calm his son down, promising to buy him a bike of his own in a few days. Ethan screamed that he didn't want a new bike. He had completely reached his breaking point and wasn't going to be bought off with toys anymore. He screamed in his father's face, his spit flying everywhere as he roared about how Marcus only cared about Hannah and Ava. He said there was no room for him in his father's life anymore. He screamed that he was done living and wanted to leave them all in peace. He threw the bike to the floor and pulled a pocket knife out of his jeans. Before anyone could move, he slashed a deep line across his own forearm. Blood started gushing down his wrist, and Marcus fell to his knees in total horror. Marcus was sobbing and begging his son to put the knife down. Ethan just let out a chilling laugh and cut himself again, his eyes fixed on me the entire time. I could see a desperate plea for help in his gaze as he stood there bleeding. It felt like he was waiting for me to be the father figure he actually needed. Marcus realized this too and turned to me, begging me to say something to the boy. He admitted that Ethan had been talking about me constantly and saying I was a better man than his own father. He was on the floor, sobbing and apologizing for everything he had done to me. He confessed that he only wanted my money and that he was a piece of trash. He begged me to save his only son because he didn't know what else to do. Before I could open my mouth, Ava screamed that no one should stop Ethan. She said since both Marcus and I were her fathers, we shouldn't show favoritism toward Ethan. Marcus's expression went from despair to pure rage, and he slapped Ava so hard her head snapped to the side. He screamed at her to shut her mouth, telling her that if his son died, she would be next. Hannah immediately pulled Ava behind her and started screaming at Marcus. She couldn't believe he was threatening a child and asked what kind of monster he really was. She screamed that his son was the problem and that he had no right to hit her daughter. Marcus had completely snapped by then and slapped Hannah right across the face. The sound of the impact echoed through the silent house. He roared that she was lucky he didn't do worse. He screamed that he was sick of both of them and their constant drama. He admitted that he only stayed with her because of her family's money and that he had wanted to hit them both for months. Ava looked at him with wide, tearful eyes and asked if he really meant those things. Marcus told her he was absolutely serious and that no one could ever truly love a brat that even her own father didn't want. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the room. Marcus tried to snatch the knife from Ethan's hand, but the boy pulled away. I let out a long sigh and reached my hand out to him, telling him to give me the blade and go get cleaned up. He was breathing heavily, and his eyes were swimming with tears. He moved so fast it was a blur. Instead of handing me the knife, he pulled it back and drove it into his own chest. We all stood there in paralyzed shock as Marcus started screaming a sound of pure agony that filled the entire house. Ethan Miller died that night at only 13 years old. No one will ever know what was going through his mind in those final seconds. I remembered that in my past life, he was the only person who visited me while I was dying in the hospital. He had hated me back then, but he still showed up when it mattered. He was living in Europe at the time, but flew back just to see me before I passed. He was the only person who showed me any shred of humanity at the end. He traveled halfway across the world just to stand by my bed and whisper an apology. It was a quiet moment, but it was the only thing that kept me sane in my final hours. That was the only reason I had tried to help him this time around. Marcus Miller lost his mind after his son's death and spent months in a psych ward. After he was released, he vanished into thin air for weeks. That was when Hannah finally showed up at my door again. She had Ava with her and told me she wanted to be a family again. She promised that it would just be the three of us from now on. Ava even managed to sound sincere when she told me she missed me and promised to be a better daughter. I just gave her a tired smile and told her I would see her in court if she didn't sign the papers. I told her I had all the time and money in the world to fight her. Ava started sobbing and clung to my arm, begging me not to abandon her. She promised to be good and never disrespect me again. I just stared at her, remembering how she told me to hurry up and die, so she wouldn't have to pay my medical bills. Those words were burned into my memory, and no amount of crying would ever erase them. I just laughed and shoved her hand away before walking to my car. They followed me around for a month, leaving dozens of voicemails and showing up at my office to apologize. They were desperate to get back to the comfortable life I had provided for them. Hannah finally signed the papers right before we went to court. I didn't care why she changed her mind. I just signed the documents and walked away from that toxic life forever. I changed my number, moved to Seattle, and started enjoying my early retirement in peace. My mother called me a few months later to tell me that Hannah had fallen off a ladder and was paralyzed from the waist down. She said Ava was constantly showing up at her house, crying about how hard her life had become. I listened to the news, but didn't feel a single spark of sympathy. My mother explained that Hannah only signed the divorce papers because Marcus Miller had come back and promised her the world. He had seduced her and promised to treat her like a queen once they were officially married. She had been so desperate for her fairy tale ending that she finally let me go. She fell for his lies and married him almost immediately after the divorce was final. In public, he played the part of the devoted husband perfectly. However, the second they were behind closed doors, he began systematically destroying Ava's self-esteem. He was a master of psychological warfare and spent every day making her feel worthless. No matter how hard she worked in school, he would just look at her with disappointment and tell her he expected more. He was slowly breaking her spirit, just like she had tried to break mine. To the outside world, Marcus looked like a great father, but Ava was living in a nightmare of emotional neglect. I just smiled when I heard the news because I knew Marcus was a professional manipulator. He was giving them exactly what they deserved. Hannah was now trapped in a wheelchair, and Ava was still just a young girl with years of Marcus's abuse ahead of her. They had traded a loving father and husband for a monster, and their misery was only just beginning. I hung up the phone and went back to enjoying my quiet, peaceful afternoon. In his past life, James gave them every single thing he had, only to be told that he had lived long enough already. This time around, he chose to let go and let Ava chase after the man she considered a perfect father. What was the ultimate result of her choice? The man they had worshipped as a saint finally revealed his true and ugly nature. Some people fail to value you not because you aren't good enough, but because they simply do not deserve you. Real love will never require you to crawl on your knees and beg for affection.